much tonight. I really thank you for coming. Thrilled to be started. So I'm just going to get my book open to my notes. Oh, it suddenly got quiet. I guess it's time to start. It got quiet. Can everybody hear me okay? Is that all right? Okay, great. I'm going to try to be a good girl and talk into the microphone. We have to remind people of that at JAM quite a lot. Good evening. I am so happy and thrilled, really, to be welcoming all of you to tonight's program here at JAM. I want to introduce myself and a little bit about JAM, where you are, and some housekeeping, and then we'll get to the people you came here to hear. My name is Samantha Davidson Green. I'm the Executive Director here at JAM. This is our home base. Hopefully some of you hear from us from our weekly newsletter or see us on social media. If you've lived in the area for a while, you might have known us as CATV, or Community Access Television, which was founded in the basement of Hanover High School in 1993 and grew to expand to cover the Upper Valley. And we continue to be CATV in our core. We cover public meetings, select board meetings, school board meetings, but we also are very active in recording a lot of local culture and life. We operate out of our center here to provide opportunities for people to learn the tools of media creation. And in this, we have a deep connection with Dena's father, whose camera work, he not only was an expert in his field, but I learned from Dena's book, had a commitment to helping people learn how to use their cameras better. And I felt such a connection with him because that's what we do here every day. And it's video. We also have a podcast booth across the street at Cartoon Studies. We encourage you to think about, as you listen to today's program, any stories that you may be interested in telling and aren't sure how to move forward. We're here as a community to help with the tools and the people who will help you shape that, to reach whoever may be precious to you that you want to share your stories with. A couple of housekeeping items. There is a bathroom. And you'll have to embarrass yourself a little bit by walking around behind us and snaking around and going through those doors and then straight across our annex space behind. But please be comfortable, be at home. If you need a glass of water, there's a bubbler in the back corner and some cups over there. A word about JAM. When we renamed 2 years ago, we merged with the film festival, the White River Indie Film Festival. Our annual festival is coming up in February. We would love to see you there again. We have 4 days of incredible new global and local cinema that we'll be celebrating. But as I mentioned, we have year-round programs here, including summer camps, after-school programs, and we've had recently a program called our Digital Content Creation for Seniors in partnership with Bugbee and AARP, and that's created an incredible Friday morning routine. We don't have that scheduled for this spring, but we hope to again in the fall, but we're just always here. Okay, now to the exciting stuff of the night. First of all, I know a lot of you in this audience, and that's incredibly meaningful to me. I also have, I've known Dena since I was a teenager at least, and Richard for at least a decade. And so this is particularly special. Richard and I collaborated on one of the projects that he's going to speak about tonight. But beyond that, I want to also just say that this is so special to me because through their work, I've learned so much more about where I grew up and the community that I'm a part of. And I think the histories that they captured really connect to the history unfolding around us at this moment. We're wedged between two Turkish restaurants where we meet people coming in from other countries. We have refugees who are staying at the Hotel Coolidge and finding employment. And many of you may be involved with some of the volunteer efforts, such that like Dena and my mother have been involved with, who are helping people who are displaced. I think the themes are as relevant as ever that we'll be discussing. So the personal is really global. I would like to say a little bit about the format tonight. We've asked each of our guests to share the projects they've been involved with for about 20 minutes or so. And then I will ask them a few moderated questions, but then we really hope to open it up and invite you. So be thinking about all of the questions you may have, or if you have projects that you're working on and want to tell us about. Before I turn it over, I just want to take a moment to talk big picture about the role of media. When CATV was formed, it was hard to get access to channels to get your message out. the world turned inside out. Now we have an explosion of options for how to get our media out, and everybody seems to be shouting and maybe not listening all that well. We're a little confused. We're a little dislocated. We can connect with people anywhere, but sometimes they're not very connected with people locally. So part of what JAM is really trying to do at this point is to reinvent what community media is about and bend those light beams back to help us connect in person. So the format that you're participating in tonight is really the essence of what we're doing at JAM to bring people together. Incidentally, we're recording it because there are a lot of people who wanted to be here tonight who can't be, and so we're making not only something for the people living now, but we're participating in building the archive of the way we are living now and the questions we're asking and the ways we're trying to solve problems together as a community. I think that the letters and the photographs that informed these projects, think about the video that we're making now or the podcasts we're recording as being all a part of that record that we're making and how they connect us. There's one anecdote toward the end of Dena's book where her father was taking photographs for troops, U.S. troops, so that they would have something to send their families, a token, a remembrance of them. In some ways, images and sound have become so cheap that we forget how precious media can be as a treasure to connect people. Sometimes the media has even become a bad word. So we're trying to do something good with it here, and we appreciate all of you being a part of that. I probably don't need to introduce much about Dena. Oh, I forgot. Welcome, everybody. Make yourself at home. Do we have enough chairs? Because we can pull some more out. You comfortable? Okay. As if anybody else comes in, Taj, please encourage them to welcome to. We'll rearrange. And there's one down here in the front. I want to give thanks to my colleagues here at JAM who are making this happen and have been a part of shaping the vision. Let's give it up for Cedar O'Dowd. They're eating a lentil soup. Woo! Cedar's been with us a little over 3.5 years, and was instrumental in envisioning this center and the kinds of community events that you're experiencing tonight. And then we have in the back Taj, our intern from Bennington College. Woo, Taj. And soon we'll have Mike Cannon coming in, who lives locally and will be taking some photos and helps make stuff work here. Okay, without further ado, I don't think I need to really introduce much about Dena, because I think many of you already know her, and you may have seen her bio. I first met Dena in high school. My husband, Jordy, who's here, back in the back, we had the extraordinary experience with some of our teachers who are also in the room to be in a community with a very unusual approach to council, and Dena was a part of that and continues to model our ways that civic engagement matters so much. She grew up and lives in Hanover, and you'll learn more about her childhood and how her father came to this area. What you may or may not know is she went to Brandeis and then received a graduate degree in English at UVA and a master's of social work from Boston College. Her essay on German citizenship was published in a book about reclaiming German citizenship. All for You, the book she'll be speaking about, is her first full-length book. And as you can see, mine is just dog-eared all over the place. There were so many things that I wanted to ask her. If you haven't had a chance to read the whole thing, I hope after tonight you will. She sings in a women's chorus, volunteers at a daycare center, and works with supporting refugees and asylum seekers. I will introduce Richard when we turn it over to him in a few minutes. Please join me in welcoming Dena Rueb Romero.
Thank you, Samantha. Is this working? I was told I had to speak right into this microphone. I always remember Willie Black at Hanover town meetings. Pretend it's, what would she say? Pretend it's an ice cream cone. Thank you very much, Samantha and Cedar, and thank you to JAM. This evening for me resulted from an experience I had watching television. I am embarrassed to admit I do get Amazon Prime, and through Amazon Prime I pay a little extra, and I can see television from abroad. And I like that because I like to hear German, I like to hear French, I like to hear some of the Scandinavian languages, none of which I speak, but I like that. So I was watching a German series, and in one of the events, a character, it takes place after the Second World War, and the character receives a letter. And in the letter is a photograph. And 2 episodes down the road, we get to see the photograph. And the photograph is the one behind me. And that really got my attention because the photograph behind me, which I didn't see until 2008 when it was released from archives in Germany, is about what happened on November 10th, 1938, what we know as the Night of the Broken Glass, or Kristallnacht. That event happened in my father's hometown of Guntersblum, Germany. And the second man in that photograph is my grandfather. So I talked to Samantha's mom, and she said, call Samantha. I called PBS in Burlington, and they were not interested in my story. But I'm very grateful that Samantha was. So I thought, I have written a book about my parents' story, and tonight I thought I would focus on what happened in my father's hometown and read a section from the book. And I'm very happy to answer questions and tell you about my mother's part of the story. My mother was not Jewish, my father was, and miraculously they survived, I think, about 8 years of being separated by the Atlantic Ocean and were committed, loyal to each other, and after long separation, married, and here I am. But I'm going to focus today on the photograph, and I'll start, if I see it, I hope I'm doing this correctly. Yes? Yes. I think. So this is Guntersblum, a very small village on the left bank of the Rhine that mainly produced wine. There were vineyards, and my grandfather had vineyards, and he also sold agricultural products. And my father, who had wanted to go to university, wasn't able to do that because after the First World War and the hyperinflation, there was no money. So he went into the business and sold insecticides and fungicides. This is another picture of Guntersblum. It's about half an hour south of Mainz, if you know that, not far from Frankfurt. And that is the house. I think that's one of my father's photographs, so that's his family house. And while they weren't wealthy, but they were a good middle-class family and well-liked in the town. This photo was in my father's sister's album. Her name was Hede, and I think it said summer 1923. And so my grandmother is the elderly woman. I'm not sure if I'm saying this right. She was in back of me. Right? Mm-hmm. Next to her, standing up, is my father's sister, Hede. My grandfather, Dena Rueb, is sitting. To his left, right? Do I have that right? Mm-hmm. Is my father, a young man. He was born in 1906. and then his mother. And this is outside in the patio of their home. And there they are, my grandparents. My father had decided that he would focus on his interest of photography, that would give him a marketable skill. And, of course, there was a great deal of pressure. 1933, Hitler came to power. The family business was not going very well. He knew he was going to have to get out, and in order for himself to survive and for his family. So this is the photograph, and I'm going to read what I've written about it in my book. On the morning of November 10th, 1938, the Guntersblum constable went to the Rueb's house. "Rueb," he said, without the usual hair, "you are to come with me." When the constable knocked on their door, David and Bertha, my grandparents, were having breakfast. "Why?" David asked. "What is wrong?" "You have to come to the town hall," the constable answered. Puzzled, David put on a jacket and accompanied the constable the short walk to the town hall. Inside, David was escorted downstairs. Is everybody hearing me all right? I hope I'm okay. Good. In there, the constable ordered. There was the basement jail cell where 2 members of the Jewish congregation already waited. One by one, the remaining men from Guntersblum's Jewish community were brought to the town hall and locked in the cell. Outside the building, a mob assembled, shouting threats. "You decrepit Jews, your last hour has come. Cut their throats, hang them." Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the men were brought upstairs. Their tormentors had removed Torahs, prayer shawls, and black robes from the synagogue. The 6 Jewish men were told to put on the black robes. Next, the prayer shawls were draped and knotted around them in a mocking fashion, the Torahs thrust in their arms. Some of the perpetrators were Guntersblum Nazis the Jewish men knew. Now, the real torment began. The Jewish men had to march through the village streets while school children watched and onlookers insulted, threw stones and dirt from the street, and spit at them. The last man in line was short. When his prayer shawl slipped and dragged on the ground, someone stepped on it so he could not move forward. Later, in the smaller streets, the men were beaten with fists, sticks, and clubs. "Aren't you ashamed of yourselves?" A woman bystander shouted at the perpetrators. "Be quiet," voices from the crowd warned her. "Shut your mouth, or you too will be taken away." The procession was photographed, the photos to appear the next day in a local store window. 14-year-old Marianne, who had brought the Rueb's groceries, this was during the boycott. Marianne used to work for my grandparents, and she would go at night, pick up a shopping list, go get things for my grandparents, and then bring them back. 14-year-old Marianne, who had brought the Rueb's groceries, was at school when the men were brought to the town hall. The children were told school was over for the day. Marianne ran with her friends to the main street, where she saw the Jewish men being led through the streets to the sound of the ringing bell. She recognized David, who looked at her briefly. As he raised his hand in her direction, she saw the gold signet ring with the rust-brown stone he always wore. Did he want to say something to her, or was he thinking, and you too are standing there watching, you who were in my home and ate at my table? Where, she wondered, did he find the strength to endure this torment? But there was no hatred in his eyes, only humility and goodness. Of this she was certain. She carried this memory with her for her entire life. Around 4 o'clock, the parade returned to the town hall. In the yard, a bonfire was prepared and gasoline poured on it and lit. Standing in a circle around the fire, the men were forced to throw the Torah scrolls into the fire, along with their robes and prayer shawls. Then they had to stand and watch until only ashes remained. As they watched, they heard rumors that their homes were being cleaned up. That evening, the men were transported to Oppenheim, the next-door town, and held there for the night. Except for some bread and wurst given to them in the Guntersblum basement cell, they had no food or water the entire day. While her husband was marched through the street, Berta, my grandmother, waited at home. In the afternoon, a Guntersblumer, wearing an SA uniform and carrying an axe on his back, entered the house. He was joined by others, including SS men from nearby Osthofen. By 4:30 p.m., a witness saw that all the windows were smashed and the curtains pulled down. Glass from the broken windows lay on the street. Because of the tremendous racket coming from the house, a mother passing by with her young child stopped and looked inside. There she saw the same man with the axe, swinging it wildly and destroying the furniture. Berta stood at the door in great distress. Frau S., she addressed the woman, is there no Lord God in heaven who can help? The woman could watch no longer and continued toward the railway station. The vandals locked Berta in one of the buildings on the property, perhaps in the laundry kitchen or in the storage area where David kept oil for his agricultural business. More vandals, some from Guntersblum, others from neighboring towns, entered the house, along with schoolboys who were encouraged to participate in the destruction. From next door, the coal seller, Klaus, who once advocated for a regime bringing order and decency, watched as linens, bowls, porcelain, and marble platters were ruined, tables and chairs smashed to bits. In the living room, the bookcases were tipped over, the books spilling onto the floor, the lexicon landing open. Someone wearing a heavy boot walked on the books. This was one of the few books David later sent to Emil, my father, in New York. In the kitchen, the large cupboard was turned over, making a huge racket. Former customers ransacked David's office and destroyed evidence that they owed the Ruebs money. Vandals were stolen and a typewriter requisitioned for the Bürgermeister. The men found their way to the cellar and drank the wine stored there. Toward the end of the evening, the cellar and the yard were strewn with empty wine bottles. Items in the warehouse, oils, fats, soaps, packing materials, pumps, and measuring devices were also damaged. Somehow, Berta managed to escape and walked to the train station. She had no coat, no handbag, no money. Frau Simon, whose son had once worked for the Ruebs, was walking home from the train station and found Bertha standing near the train crossing. Ach, Frau Simon, Bertha said, terribly upset. Could you lend me some money so I can buy a train ticket? I want to go to my daughter in Frankfurt. Frightened she could be sent to the Osthofen concentration camp if she were seen helping a Jew, Frau Simon was going to send her son behind the building to give Bertha the money. Just then Hede, my father's sister, appeared looking for her parents. Hede and her mother boarded a train for Frankfurt and took a streetcar to Hede's apartment. The next day, David was released and joined them. That evening, the mob continued vandalizing Jewish homes. They would have burned the former synagogue, but a neighbor came out to protest. If you burn the synagogue, you will burn my property next door, he admonished. How did Bertha keep herself together that day as the home she had tended, the possessions she prized, were smashed and destroyed? She must have been terrified for her husband and for herself, and in shock as her orderly world was attacked. And from where did David muster the dignity Marianne saw as he was paraded through the village? The Ruebs knew many of the people who marched David through the street, who terrorized Bertha in her home. Some were David's customers. One can only imagine the Ruebs' fear and humiliation. That their son was safe in New York was small consolation. Is there no Lord God in heaven who can help? Bertha had asked a passerby. That day in Guntersblum, the answer was no. I don't know if I've used up my time or...
No, that was about 11:15. Was there more that you wanted
No,
to read?
that was it.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Dena. So I hope this will work, but we wanted to invite Richard to share his family project, which has a connection to Jewish American experience in a similar time frame, influenced by the Holocaust, and then we'll open it up for questions. So don't forget your questions for Dena. But I'd like to introduce Richard briefly. So as I mentioned, I had the chance to collaborate with Richard a little bit on a fictionalized screenplay, which I think you're going to mention a little bit, right, and then talk about your father. Which was one of the things that brought us together when I was teaching an Osher screenwriting class, and Richard brought this project. But I learned a few more things about him even than I already knew. We are now colleagues at JAM because he does video recording for us. So I knew that he had a business offering video memoir production services to individuals and families. So that's a little soft sell on services here. But he also works with us to record public meetings. When he helps prepare subjects, he helps them on how to approach life stories and helps to videotape them. That's his forte. I also learned that he went to Amherst College. And maybe I knew that, but my father also went to Amherst College, so we're going to did we figure that out already? I'm not sure. And majored in political science, and in his bio says he learned that history is what cultures believe about the stories. After retiring, Richard became an active volunteer with Osher at Dartmouth, and without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Can everyone hear? Excellent. There we go. So my first question to everyone is, who here follows the Olympics? Raise your hand. A few. And who here follows track and field events within that venue. Okay, so I'm going to discuss briefly an overview of the Summer Olympics and its evolution, and then I'll talk about my father and his experience. This is Baron Pierre de Coubertin. I'm not French, but he was the one who originated the idea of the modern Olympics. The first one happened in 1896, and a quote from him, why he was so passionate about sports and an international competition. Organized sport can create moral and social strength. I strongly believe that. Of course, modern sports, with the infusion of billions of dollars and so forth, we've come away from that a bit. But internationally, sports is kind of the big thing. Here are a few famous sportsmen from different Olympics. This is Jim Thorpe, an Indian from American Indian, who won 3 gold medals in, and I think it was 1912. Those medals were later taken away from him because it turned out he had played semi-professional baseball for a bit and was paid. And especially at that time, it had to be strictly amateur. So they took the medals away and they awarded them again later when they realized that that was a foolish rule. This is Paavo Nurmi. Does anyone remember that name? A few. At one time, he had the world's record for 3 long-distance runs: the mile, the 5,000, and the 10,000. That has not happened since. If you've seen the movie Chariots of Fire, you might recognize these gentlemen. Harold Abramson on the left and Eric Bedell on the right. Wonderful movie, and its theme song is still in everyone's mind.
Do you have a sec to hop over?
Sorry?
We've got to just full screen it.
All right.
Might be just a little too far. I'm not sure. If you can advance it to the next one, Cedar, that would be great.
Thank you. Anyone recognize this man? Johnny Weissmuller. Tarzan, for some who didn't know about his world record. This woman is 16 years old. Her name is Betty Robinson, and she won the world record at age 16, 12.2 seconds for the 100-meter dash. 16 years old. In the current controversy about should women and men compete on the same team, here's an example of a woman from Poland whose name American Stella Walsh. She won the world's record in 1932, and they wanted to give her a biological check to see are you man or woman. Either she refused or it didn't happen. And indeed, later her autopsy was done, and she was classified as, quote, intersex. So she had a penis and other masculine physical traits, but she still won the world's record running as a woman.
Richard, can I pause you? Because Cedar was shaking the head. So I wanted to invite you to comment in terminology in 1930, whatever might have been different. Did you want to speak? Can we share the microphone just on the term
Please.
The classification of intersex and how that might have changed?
So intersex is different from transgender. Transgender is, as maybe many of you know, when somebody is assigned either male or female at birth, and later in life they don't feel like that aligns with how they feel on the inside, so they can transition. And intersex is basically physically people's sexes don't always align with male or female. It's pretty common. I think it's like 1 in 100 people, almost as common as red hair. And intersex conditions can either be physical, so someone, typically it's not necessarily like a woman with a penis, it's more so like a woman who has some internal characteristics or hormonal differences. There's a lot of different types of intersex conditions, ranging from chromosomal differences, which are like controversies about Olympic athletes having are kind of like that's like the front lines, but there's also hormonal differences. And yeah, as far as gender and sexual expression, I'm happy to answer any questions personally after, also regards to trans athletes. I know a lot about it.
Just imagine 1932, what the attitudes were. So the public need to know, who is this person, what gender? In 1936, she ran in the Olympics.
Mike, it's communicating with that computer, so just to make sure that there's a line of sight for the clicker.
Sorry.
Thanks.
I'll be back there. There we go. She ran against this woman, Helen Stevens, who they had the same questions about. She won 2 or 3 world records. Jesse Owens was in that era and in that Olympics, and they were all often shown together as the Superwoman and the Superman. This is Babe Didrikson Zaharias. That name might be familiar. Besides being an Olympic star, she was one of the best golfers in the country. American, right. So now we get to the 36 Berlin Olympics and my father's story. He was called the Human Bullet, or the Green Wave Express. He was from Tulane University. He was the champion of the 100-yard dash and the 220 in the Southeast Conference. So when it came time to confront the boycott that was being talked about and advocated, don't go American team, don't go to the Olympics. That got resolved. They did go. But anyway, the story continues. This is him as a child. I sure wish I had that hobby horse. This is his father, Leo. And this is him on the freshman team at Tulane University. The man next to him was the coach, Fritz Oakes. My father lost his father at age 13, and Fritz was as close to a father as anyone else. They loved each other, and of course, Dad was the star of the team. Here he's winning. There's the T for Tulane. I'm not sure which race this was, but he won almost all the races, except when he went out to California and ran against Jesse Owens. And he came in second, so not too shabby. This is his winning against LSU. They were intense competitors, especially in that year. The man on the left is Glenn Slats Harden, who did go to the Olympics and won the 400-meter high hurdles. And this is Dad. He had tied 2 world records in Texas. However, there was a 5-mile-an-hour wind that day, and I think up to 4 miles per hour. That would have gone in the record books, but his didn't. But nevertheless, everyone knew that he had won the world record time. So now we get back to the boycott. On the left is Avery Brundage, who continued in the Olympic movement. And this letter says to my father, or to Dear Sir, but this was his copy, you are among the runners who are candidates to go to the tryouts in Flushing Meadow, New York. Enclosed in this letter was a postcard with 2 boxes, yes or no. Yes, if you would be willing to go to the tryouts, and no, if not. So Dad checked no, sent it in, and nothing else was said by anyone. I don't think anyone knew about his decision until there was a runner at LSU who, in the sports article, was asked, he was Jewish, he said, well, you're Jewish, would you go to the Olympics? And he said, why, of course I'd go. Neugass is going. My father read that and then wrote a letter to the editor, to the sports editor of the Times-Picayune. And in that, he said, if you can read it, I won't read it again, but he declared I wouldn't go to a place that discriminates among athletes. And there was a question whether the Germans had made good on their promise not to discriminate, but my father had other information that said, of course, that's happening.
There you go. Oh.
So that letter that appeared in the Times-Picayune was picked up by the New York Times, and they put it in their paper saying Neugass is not going because of German policies. This was off Father Conklin, a Catholic priest who was railing against Jews and other minorities. But he had a radio program that reached 2 million people, supposedly. And so the whole issue of boycott or not was a hot issue until the AAU, in responses from other athletes, said overwhelmingly the athletes want to go. So they did. This is the fencer Helene Mayer, who herself was half Jewish, and she was a world champion, and there was a question whether she would fence for the German team. She did, and she came in second during the Olympics. This is a woman named Gretel Bergmann, who was the champion high jumper, German, and the Jews were told, we'll keep our promise, we'll let you practice and hone your skills, but this is the field where they were allowed to practice. So it was obvious this was a ruse in the international world to say, oh yeah, we're keeping our promise. Jesse Owens. Not enough can be said about him. Here he is in the high jump. He won 4 gold medals, the first one to win 4 in track and field. Another picture of this amazing athlete. So there's a story about what happened for the 4th medal. The 4th medal was a relay, the 400-meter relay. And there were 2 gentlemen. Whoops. Let me go past that. All right. Whoops. Sorry, let me find. Anyway, I'll just say it. 2 gentlemen named Marty Glickman and Sam Stoller, who did go to the trials, who were like 6th and 7th among the runners. So they went, and the whole time over on the boat, and when they got to the stadium, it was assumed they would be in that relay race. The morning of that race, the last track and field event of the Olympics at that time, the American coach read off the names of the runners, and the 2 Jews were not in that list. Jesse Owens was, and another man named Ralph Metcalf, who were terrific runners, didn't have to do with that, but a precedent had been set that number 6 and 7 in the trials would be in the relay. So they never got their medals. Posthumously, Marty Glickman was awarded a gold medal for being discriminated against, and Sam Stoller, who had passed, I think his family got theirs. So here's the opening ceremony of that Olympics, the torchbearer, which, by the way, was the first time they had the torch run from Greece to the home country. And Jesse Owens befriended another athlete, a German athlete who was a competitor in the long jump, which he also won that year. Long was ahead in the competition, and just before Owens did his last jump, Long went up to him and said, the way you're approaching the pad from which you jump is, try it this way. So he gave him a tip. Owens won the race and became the winner of 4 gold medals. And here's Long again. There's Long again. He died in 1942 in Italy, and Owens still had befriended the family of Long, and Owens went to a wedding of his son years later. Those are the 2 Americans, Glickman and Stoller, who did not run. In that relay, there was a passing of the baton that one German judge called illegal, and they would have been disqualified. But other judges came and said, no, we won't take that ruling. So the Americans won in world record time, and Owens got his 4th medal. This is Helene Mayer when she won 2nd in fencing. Fast forward about 25 years. My father around 1960. In 1980, the U.S. did boycott an Olympics that was held in Moscow under Carter was president, and my father was invited to the White House having boycotted the earlier Olympics. Finally, this is a plaque that was in the Sports Hall of Fame at Tulane. Unfortunately, that building was wiped out by Katrina, so I'm not sure this plaque exists anymore, but I captured a picture of it. So,
Thank you so much, Richard.
For questions?
Yeah, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. First, thank you both so much
Sorry
for
for
sharing
all
your
that.
projects. No, I'm sorry on the technical. I'm just going to ask 3 questions to both of you to get us rolling, and I'm sure the room will fill with many more. I am fascinated by similarities between your 2 stories, where there was a personal connection through a family member. Both of you, it seemed, your fathers were pretty instrumental, and then that led you into territory beyond maybe that family member's experience, but even to chapters that family member missed, like Kristallnacht. Your father was on this side of the ocean, and you filled in for what your father didn't experience in those Olympics. Fascinated by that. I think about both of your stories. I experience you as each being on a mission, that you had a responsibility in a way to tell this story. You were bearers of these memories in a way. I don't know if that's true, but you're nodding your head, so I think that's true. And I wonder if others in the room have that feeling, that you are holding memories and there's something sacred in that. Can you share, and they say when a person dies, it's like burning a library, right? Which is a pretty apt metaphor for examining the Nazis. So these are precious. Describe your experience when you kind of, I don't know if it was in an instant or over time, when it became clear to you that you needed to tell this story, and how you went about finding the form to do that. Does the question make sense? Okay.
Dena, you want to start?
I think for me it started after my father died. I'd always heard about my parents' story. But after my father died, I came upon a box of letters. It was a box at my mother's house, which I probably shouldn't have opened, but since my mother wasn't there, I did open it. And I saw that it was letters from my grandparents to my father, copies. My father, thank God, had typed a lot of letters to his parents and kept copies. And little by little, there was a light shed on what was in the box. I took a few, I couldn't read my grandparents' handwriting because it was that old German Zütterling handwriting. So I took it to Harry Broiler, who was still at the high school, and he did me the favor of typing up 2 of the letters. And it was a very amazing experience. It was the first time I felt that I heard my grandparents' voices. So little by little, I paid someone to transcribe the letters, and little by little started filling in the blanks of what I didn't know about my grandparents. And I felt very strongly that these were personal, historical documents. My mother, I think, felt they were personal and shouldn't have been shared. But I felt they were a part of history. And so what I really wanted to do was tell the story. And it took a very long time. I think having a baby was much easier than writing a book. But I am so grateful when somebody says to me, I read your book, because I just feel like history is more than just dates and treaties and who won a war. History is what real people like you and me, normal, regular human beings, experience. And that's what I tried to do in the book. So that was kind of the mission that I felt.
I had a very different experience. In 1991, the U.S. Holocaust Museum mounted a special exhibit called the Nazi Olympics. And on opening night, I went, and I got to see the broad picture about the Olympics. I knew my father's story wasn't so public, but it became public then. And now I've given a similar talk several times to broaden the understanding of what he did. He would have never appeared in any book or reminiscence, even if he had won that, been part of the relay. But his decision made his fame.
Incredible. I'm so curious about the form that people's stories take. So we had dinner together before, and I was saying here at JAM we have people come with their photos, or they say, I want to tell this story, but I'm not sure how to do it. And some people have writing skills, which Dena's a phenomenal writer, and visual skills like Richard's. But when you were choosing the form to tell the story, what kind of audiences did you have in mind? And in that question, if you think about the past, the present, and the future, how did that affect your choice of form?
Okay.
And maybe you're not done with telling your story. Maybe it's going to keep evolving in form. Feel free to talk about that.
So after seeing the Nazi Olympic exhibit, I said, this story's got to be told, not just my father, but this broader story. So I wrote a screenplay. That's how we first met. And about midway through my efforts, the movie Race came out, which was the story of Jesse Owens and his life, and the whole story almost was told in that movie. So I stopped writing that one. There may be another movie in there.
Well, I guess I was very fortunate in that my father was a photographer. I mean, he got into photography as a teenager. It was a hobby, and he had an experience. He went to England to appeal to a cousin of his mother's for help, and that cousin denied any help. And my father said it was one of the worst moments of his life. And he was walking through London and stopped in front of a photography store and saw in the window all these old-fashioned, large format cameras and equipment. And Germany at that point in time was at the forefront of developing what they called Kleinbildfotografie, so 35 millimeter photography, and the very small Leica. And my father wrote somewhere, he said, I'm not a religious man, but in that moment, he really had a brainstorm. And he said he would go back to Germany and he would study and learn how to be a photographer. So I was very lucky that I had photographs, I had documents, I knew people in the town. I went there one year with the two photo albums that my Lutheran grandfather had rescued. My Jewish grandparents and their daughter and son-in-law were deported from Frankfurt. But my Lutheran grandfather was able to rescue these two albums, and I took the albums and I sat at tables with people in the town and said, do you know this person? Do you know this person? Is this person still alive? So I could interview people who had known my family. So the one thing that was different in the book was that I had an editor, and she said, you have to include yourself, which is something I really didn't want to do. I just wanted to tell the story. So I found a way to include myself and put in some what I called Hanover interludes, and that became part of the book.
What a good editor you had. Because that was one of the things that stood out that as a form choice that I thought was so great, in part because the story, if you haven't read it, we follow her father and he arrives, guess where? At the train station at White River Junction. After making it to New York, he gets off the train here one evening, as we have every night happen here, rumbling through. 1939, yeah. He later gets back on the train after the war has started, and as a citizen of an enemy nation, although he's lost his citizenship as a Jew from Germany, but he can't move anywhere, but he wasn't aware of that. He was so busy working at the camera shop and gets back on that train to go to New York and visit relatives. So the interjections of Dena's voice, you really touched me in both the things that you identified that you never left your imagination and how that landed for you. And then there's one moment where she says, I couldn't let my mind go there, of what happened to her grandparents and aunt and uncle after they were deported to Minsk, Russia, and perish in the concentration camps. And that was a question I had, was about how you dealt with the emotional intensity of the subject matter the deeper you got into it. Because what I experienced in particularly your story, Dena, Richard, maybe there was a similar kind of courage at certain moments, but courage not only to go into the darkest corners of history with your own relatives experiencing that, and to go beyond the documents to imagine it in these details that are so human. So how did you muster that courage? But at the same time, you kept your parents and grandparents from being these simplistic heroes. You allowed them to be the complicated people, and sometimes they acted in ways that maybe were hard for you to morally understand, although the journey of writing it seems to be a part of making peace with that. So I'm wondering if you could talk about the courage it took.
There were times when it was not easy. Some days I would sit at the computer and I'd say, okay, I'm going to take a deep breath and I'm going to focus on writing this story because it's important and I want to get it out. There were moments that were embarrassing because I found love letters between my parents, and, you know, who wants to acknowledge that their parents were ever sexual beings? Not I. And I could feel my cheeks getting red. And it's a good thing my mother did not live for this book being published. As a matter of fact, once I came upon a folder of her letters to my father, and her sister was visiting, and she said, "You have to put it back where you found it." And I regret that I didn't take it to Nomen Copy and paid whatever they asked for to have those letters copied. Those letters are gone. But I did have some of her letters, so I did have a glimpse of that. And the most difficult thing to, besides the testimony of what happened on November 10th, was realizing that my father had competing goals. He was trying to buy his way into the camera shop. He was trying to get my mother over from England, and he was trying to get his parents out of Germany and his sister. What I was able to piece together was that he thought he had more time, and he focused on getting the money so he could buy his way into the camera shop, believing that then he would be creditworthy, the banks would lend him money, and he could then send money for the ship's passage, at least for his sister and her husband, because they had visas. And his focus was really on the camera shop, and that was very painful. I understand it. The process of writing the book was a process of figuring out what might have been going on for him. You know, how did he get up every day in the morning and go to the camera shop knowing that things were so bad? And could he really allow himself to know how bad things were? So that was a very painful part.
I do have some comment about that. I've often wondered, and he had passed by the time I wondered it, what were you thinking when you marked the no? Don't you want to go and beat those Nazis or win the race? I don't know. I think he did it alone. He didn't tell anyone. Like I said, it was an accident that the public found out that he had boycotted. And the second thing I wanted to know, what were you feeling, Dad, by giving up that opportunity? He didn't talk about that while alive, and I can imagine it. But
I'd love to open it to questions. I think we don't have a wireless mic, is that right? So maybe what we'll do, if you have a question, if you can kind of say it out loud and clear, and I might just repeat the gist of it in the microphone for the recording. Does anybody like to kick us off?
Yeah. Susan.
My question, Dena, for you is, had you seen that picture before so that you knew that was your grandfather? How did, seeing it on television, did you know that it was him?
I had seen that picture. In the box of letters, there was a testimony from one of the people who had been there. So I knew what had happened, and I knew that photographs had been taken, but I was never able to find them until 2008. So apparently those photographs were in the archives, in one of the state archives. And because the way German law worked, they weren't released until 2008. And in the mail, I got a copy of the picture from a friend of mine in that town. This friend was the retired Lutheran minister who had done a lot of work researching and writing about the former Jewish community of that town. And that was the first time I saw the photograph.
Yeah.
I can vouch for the fact that I want to read your book because my wife was riveted for, I think, a week straight reading it. I was curious, and I haven't read it, so I don't. Maybe the answer is in the book. But did you? Hi, I haven't seen you in a long time. Do you have any sense of how the Hanover community, how aware they were of your father's predicament, and how they interacted with him on that basis, or received him, or supported him, or didn't, or do you have any?
Well, at that time, the Jewish community of Hanover was not very large. My father was taken under the wing of several Dartmouth professors, one of whom, Louis Silverman, in the math department, who was Jewish. There was a philosophy professor whose name I've forgotten, who was only there a couple years, and he was very kind to my father. I think people knew because at that point in time he was a bit of an oddity. There weren't a lot of German Jewish refugees. I think he was the first. And of course he was in the camera shop, and people came because they heard about this German photographer, Emil. Everybody knew Emil. And he started telling people his story, mostly focusing on my mother. My mother had gotten a job in England and went there in 1937. And when the war broke out in 1940, she was interned as an enemy alien on the Isle of Man. And when my father heard that, I mean, he immediately thought, oh my God, concentration camp, which was not the case. But so he firmly believed that intellectuals, writers, artists had influence. And he would tell anybody who was willing to listen his story. And he was able to get letters of support from, Dartmouth people. I believe there was one from President Hopkins, but I haven't made it to the Rauner archives to see if that was the case. Where things got dicey was when the United States went to war. And my father was stateless, as Samantha said, and therefore an alien. And there were all these decrees, like you weren't supposed to have cameras. He was a partner in a camera shop. And you had to get permission in, quadruplicate if you wanted to go outside Hanover, which is a little kind of ridiculous because my father took photos of babies and animals, and that was how he made extra money. And to go to Norwich, he'd have to get permission. And
A week ahead of time from Concord.
from Concord. How are you getting there? And there was one funny letter he wrote, and he said, I think it was the Attorney General, I'm so sorry, to bother you, but the babies and the animals I was supposed to photograph are indisposed. And couldn't I just, check in with the Hanover police chief? And no, had to go through Concord. So I think he did feel supported until the FBI showed up in this dark room. And that was a little dicey, but it got cleared up.
Great. Yeah.
Dena, how much did your parents talk about this whole their history?
Can you repeat the question? How much did her parents talk about this history with you?
They talked a lot about their story, but very little about my Jewish grandparents. Very little.
Great. Do we have any other questions? In the back.
Richard. Hi. What did you and your dad talk about the boycott? Did he talk about that, and what did he do after the boycott with his running? Or how open was he?
He graduated just after this happened, and never put on. Well, he ended up mentoring young athletes in track. So he continued in that way.
Did he talk to you about the boycott? No. Yes?
No, I learned mostly through the exhibit at the Holocaust Museum, and I gave Samantha my data sheet, which was about 20 pages long, about anyone who had any connection to the Olympics or prior Olympics, etc. The boycott was big, and it came very close to passing in the AAU. But Avery Brundage made sure that it didn't pass, and such was history.
I came across Pakistan too in letters that I read. I didn't know it was in all towns. I thought it was in Berlin, but I see now. I mean, how far away was the town from Berlin?
Far.
So how did they communicate? Was it all the same night, or was it at different times?
I think it just repeat the question. Yes.
So the question was, she was aware of the Kristallnacht happening in Berlin, but not aware that it happened in all these different cities and towns around the country.
Well, you probably know it started when a young Jewish man killed, I think he was a German ambassador, or now I'm blanking out, in Paris. And because of that, the Nazi regime said there were going to be reprisals, and there were reprisals all over Germany. And what's interesting is there are not very many photographs about it, and usually the photographs that have been unearthed are from the larger cities. This particular town, and there were 7 photographs. So there's a historian who wrote a book about this particular town. Unfortunately, it's in German, but the title is A Completely Normal Pogrom. So it was all over Germany.
One of the things that we have the privilege of experiencing here at JAM is the individuality of people's stories. And I think both of you are helping to demonstrate how important, sometimes we think, oh, it's just my family or it's just me. But through your individual story and the ordinary people, as you said, Dena, it leads to the big picture, the small town that experienced Kristallnacht that we might not have known about without your bringing this to light for us. So thank you for that. And I also just, I'll throw one more question in, and then maybe we'll wrap up. If anybody has a last one, feel free to raise a hand after. But I think through the telling of these, you both have a very strong moral compass that seems to be guiding you, and the telling of history as an important ethical practice, I hope in order to learn something and maybe to guide us in our choices and how we behave now against these big tides that sometimes can feel out of our control, yet we have some zone. Sometimes we don't have control, but sometimes we at least have some realm we can act. Do you have anything to share about how, in our present moment, you would want your stories to speak to audiences facing the complexities of the war in Israel-Palestine or other conflicts, or the way we receive refugees, asylum seekers? What is the sort of moral takeaway that maybe you would want us to carry?
Yes. My father wanted to keep everything quiet. In the Jewish community in New Orleans, it was the watchword was "Don't make waves." And the lesson is you've got to make waves when they're about to inundate you.
That's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, because when I asked my father, how could this have happened in Germany, he said, well, the message always was, don't stick your neck out, don't make waves. I feel less able to comment about Israel and Gaza, other than I'm glad my father wasn't alive while this is all going on. But what I will say is I really hope that people who do read the book give some consideration to what it's like to be a refugee. I mean, the people at our southern border, if they could choose, they would stay home. They'd much rather stay home. They are not just coming here because they hear that the streets are paved with gold. Most of them are fleeing really bad situations. And being a refugee is not an easy place to be. So I guess what I would most hope is that people would have empathy for refugees and for people trying to come here.
Thank you. My story connects with Dena's. I got as a graduation gift from Hanover High School a Konica camera from the Hanover Camera Shop. Dena's father had passed away by then, so I don't know who exactly owned it, but I loved that store, and here I am now as a filmmaker and somebody who really believes in the power of media. And my mom, who gave me that camera, is here, as she sent me off to California. So I would love to just ask, you don't have to speak, but by a show of hands, how many of you have some kind of project? It might just be in a shoebox, or it could be something you're writing or making. How many of you have some sort of family history project in motion?
Whoa.
That's wonderful. So I would just like to make an open invitation. I'd love to see some of you here next January with some form that we could share. And just remember that we're here to help you if you need any help. If you don't, awesome. But we really cherish these stories and hope to amplify the archive by recording these opportunities to talk with you all as creators. And I'm going to put Dena on the spot here. I just, how many of you think it would be a good idea if Dena maybe read her book and made it into like an audio book? Yeah? Yeah, okay, no pressure, no pressure. Okay, this is a format we're pioneering. We've got one audio book already on our website, another historical family project. So keep that in mind. We can support that kind of project as well. If there aren't are there any other burning questions? I mean, maybe our authors will be here for a minute if you'd like to talk with them afterwards. But if not, I want to thank you again for coming to Jam tonight. It was so wonderful to be with you. And thank you, Dena and Richard. And thank you, crew.